Hello and welcome to the channel. In a previous video we've seen how to compare two workbooks, compare two worksheets, and compare two columns. So we've seen several ways to compare different things in Excel, and I've got a lot of questions. So I thought I would explain that in more detail. So in this video I'm going to explain that in a bit of more detail. But if you don't have the time to understand and to learn how to do that, you can also have a look at this Excel add-in that I've put together. It's called Compare XLS. That allows you to compare a lot of different things in Excel. I'm gonna leave the link in the description. Have a look. If you download that, it is a compressed file that contains an XLAM file, which is the extension for an Excel add-in. If you download that to wherever location in your drive, then you can come here to the developer tab and Excel add-ins, and you can browse and look for that. Microsoft will bring you to roaming Microsoft add-ins, but you can actually navigate to any other location. I have the add-in right here, compare XLS, and then you just add it. You don't need to install anything. It's just add-in. That's why the name add-in. If you add it, you will get, when you open Excel, this additional tab, which says compare XLS, and here you will be able to get a workbook summary for this particular workbook, or worksheet summary for the worksheet you are on. Then you will get this dialog to select the workbooks you want to compare. You can open new workbooks. You can then compare worksheets in the same workbook or in a different workbook, and you get a lot of different stuff here. So have a look if you're interested about that, and let me know in the comments if that was useful. So now, if you want to learn how to do that, I'm going to show you in detail in this video. So in this first video, we will work with workbooks. We will compare two workbooks, two or three or more. And comparing workbooks is just about comparing the properties of each workbook. Sometimes people say comparing workbooks, but they refer actually comparing worksheets. So doing a cell-to-cell comparison. We'll see that in the next video. In the next video, we'll be comparing worksheets. In this video, we will be comparing workbooks. So let's move to the Visual Basic Editor. And we're going to have a first macro. I'm going to call it compare WB. And the first thing we want to do is to declare WB1 as a workbook and WB2. And if you want to compare more than two workbooks, so you would simply go ahead and say WB3 as a workbook and so on, right? But that would make things later a bit more complicated, because you would probably want to compare workbook 1 with 2, then 1 with 3, 2 with 3. But here we're going to assume you're going to compare two workbooks. If you want to compare several workbooks, like many workbooks, all the workbooks open, then you would go for something like just WB, and then you would go with, for each WB in workbooks, this would take every workbook open, and within this loop you would add all the you would get all the information for each of the workbooks. And we're going to look at how to get that information in a moment. So that's how you would do it if you want to compare all the workbooks open. But again, usually you just want to compare the two workbooks. So we're going to stick with WB1 and WB2. Now, you could set WB1 to whatever workbook. You can specify here the exact name of the workbook. So workbooks, and then the name, and the workbook must be open. Or you can also say just the first workbook which was open against the second, and so on. But maybe you prefer, or that's at least how I've been doing it, I keep this macro in one workbook, and then I open the two workbooks that I want to compare. So to do that, we're gonna actually write another macro to open the workbook, and then we will call open WB. This will open workbook 1, and then we will call the same. So we're gonna use the same macro to open a workbook, but the second time will be open WB2. And let me put that in another module. And here will be open WB. And we've seen how to open a workbook in several other videos, but I'm just going to go through that again. So we're going to use the file dialog properties. So I will say my dialog as a file dialog. And we set my dialog to application file dialog. That's the property of the application object. And then here we're going to select to a file picker. Right? So we're going to pick a file. And then if my dialog show equals -1, so -1, it means we have selected something, otherwise it will be another number. Then we're gonna get the file name. Let's say my file equals my dialog selected items 1, because we're just gonna select one item, one file, right? Then we can say workbooks open my file, and if so, this is gonna open the file if it's not already open. And then when we open it, that becomes the active workbook. So then we can say WB1 equals active workbook. And we're gonna also get WB full name 1 is gonna be WB1 full name. So the difference between name and full name is that the full name includes the path. And we need that to compare the two files that we're gonna open. So we're gonna then do the same for the second workbook. So I'm gonna copy and paste this. So this is gonna be WB2 and WB2. Full name 2. And then we're gonna say if the full name 1 is the same as the full name 2, then hey, select two different files, and we're gonna exit the SAP. We will not continue, but if it's okay, here we're gonna start to get workbook properties. And we will start with workbook 1. So let me play this and show you how that looks like. But before we do that, let me save it. And of course, we're gonna save it as a macro enable. So down here, it's gonna be an Excel SM. Let me save it here. I'm gonna call it compare WB. Okay, and now we can go and run this macro. And here I see that there was a mistake. This is WB2. So now if we run it, I'm gonna go here to files, and I have two different workbooks, and they contain data for an inventory. The first one has the cosmetic products. So we're gonna pick, that's gonna be our first workbook, workbook 1. And then it prompts again another dialog to pick the second workbook. So the second is gonna be the inventory for grocery products. So I've selected the two. These are two different workbooks. So it didn't prompt this message. Now the workbooks are both open now. If they were already open, this would work. It could prompt an error. You would have to do some error handling here in the other macro. We've seen that in some previous videos. So to make sure you open safely the workbooks. And probably what we want to do here is we're gonna go back to this workbook and activate. So this will simply focus again on this workbook. But we're gonna compare these other two workbooks. But in this workbook is where we're gonna put the output. So for example, here we're gonna have the properties for workbook 1 and workbook 2. For example, you can display this here, or you can use a message box or a user form, or there are different ways to do it. But for now, let's just put it here. And what we're gonna get, or what we want to get, we want to compare different properties of the two workbooks, right? So again, we are not comparing the worksheets in the workbooks and so on. We are comparing properties of the workbook. So properties like of course, we could compare the name, the path. They are actually in the same drive path. We could compare who's the author, what was the date um, when it was created, who was the last user that modified that workbook. Sometimes that's one of the things we want to check. And when was last updated? When was the last date when it was updated? We could also check if we could check the file size. Yeah, and this is gonna be in kilobytes. And we could also check if it's protected, or if it's read only. Um, and then we could, of course, get the number of sheets each workbook has to see if they have the same number of sheets. We could also get the number of charts, and this would rather be chart sheets. And we could also get the number of defined names, for example. We could probably get a few more things, but let's start with this. And if we want to get more information, such as how many cells with values or cells with content do we have all together, then we will have to loop through each of the sheets. And we're going to see that in the next video when we look at comparing worksheets, okay? And in the same way, if we want to see how many shapes do we have in each workbook, or how many tables, pivot, etc., we need to loop through each of the worksheets and add them together. So we're gonna see that in the next video. So in this video, we will focus on these properties. And to do that, let's go back to our to the Visual Basic editor. We're gonna start with Workbook 1. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna say with WB1, and let's assign each of the properties to a variable. We could do that, or we could directly write into the worksheet. But I'm gonna, to make it look cleaner and easier to understand, I'm gonna do it this way. So WB name 1 is gonna be WB1.name, right? And in the same way, we're gonna get the path. That's gonna be path. Now sorry, this is a mistake. This is not a dot. This is a variable. And we didn't declare these variables. We can declare the variables up here. We can do that later. The other one we want to know probably is the author. And here we have to use the built-in document properties property of the workbook object, and we have to specify here we want to get the author. Then we will get the date created, and again we're gonna use also the built-in document properties to get the creation date. Then we can get the last author, or the last user, let's call it last user, that modify the workbook. And again, that's going to be with built-in document properties, last author. Okay, so I'm actually following here. The next thing we could get is the last time the file was updated. So let's call it WB last updated 1. Remember, we are checking the properties for workbook 1. And for this, we're going to use the VBA function file date time, and that's going to be for WB1.fullName. We need the full name here with the path. And we're also going to use, to get the file size 1, we're going to use the VBA function file length, and again full name. and this is gonna give the file size in kilobytes. Let me scroll down. We can get now, we can see, we can check if the workbook is protected. Let's call it WB protect 1 with wb1.protect structure. You see, protect is a method. We have to look at those with an envelope and a hand. Those are the properties. So the protect is structure, and this is gonna return true or false. And similarly, we can get read only, and it's gonna return as well true or false if the workbook is whether the workbook is protected or not. Sorry, whether the workbook is read only or not. And as you see, if we just hit the dot for WB1, we get here many other properties that we could add, right? But these are probably the most common, that what I'm showing you here. So now to get the number of sheets, number of charts, and number of names, so let's call it WB sheets 1. We're gonna have here WB1 sheets and WB charts, WB.charts, and this is gonna be only chart sheets, not embedded charts. To have the total number of embedded charts, we need to loop through each of the worksheets, because embedded charts are actually chart objects for a particular worksheet. And then names, WB1 dot names, and these are defined names. So defined names, that's something you can check for any workbook here. So in the name manager. So we don't have any names here, but if you have some defined names, they would show up here. Okay, so I think we have got all the properties that we were interested in, so that we have listed here. Now we're gonna end the with statement here, and what we can do now is we can write that to column B. So for workbook 1. So with this workbook active sheet, we're gonna have in range B2, we're gonna have the workbook name, range B3, the path, and so on. So we're gonna just add the variables to each cell. And I'm actually gonna copy this to make it faster. Okay, and then we end the with statement here, and I think we can run and check how that looks like for workbook 1. So I'm gonna save and run the macro now. Oh, there's a mistake here. That should be activate, not active chart. Let's run the macro now and see. We select the first workbook, and then we select the second workbook. Now, so there's some mistake here. Oh yes, I forgot. That should say actually count. And this will include, as you probably know already, this will include worksheets and charts. So if we want to make the differentiation, we should rather use worksheets here, and then we have the charts down here. So, and the sum, of both will be the total number of sheets. Same for names, yeah, that's names count. So I suppose we can run it now, select the two workbooks. That's the first and that's the second. And if we come back here, we see we have got already the name, the path, the author, the date created. It was somewhere last year. The date modified was today and time. The size in kilobytes, so 10,000 kilobytes. It's not protected, it's not read-only, it has only one sheet, and it doesn't have charts or names. Yeah, that's referring to this workbook here. One sheet, yeah, and that's information for this workbook. Now, if we want to have the information for workbook 2, we would simply copy this, go down here. That's gonna be now workbook 2, and we only need to change this here to workbook 2. We should also probably change this instead of 1 to 2, but actually if we just want to print that in the worksheet, we don't even need to change it. But if we want to do a comparison within the macro, so if we want to say is WB1 equals to WB2, then we will have to change here the name for each of the variables. So that would be 2, 2, 2. But I'm going to leave it to 1 because I'm also going to copy this. And the only thing we're going to do here is to display the information for the second workbook. Instead of in column B, it's going to be in column C. So I'm just going to change that here. And that's the reason I'm leaving the name of that variable for now, because then I don't need to change it right here as well, right? So now if we run the macro now again, we pick the first workbook, then we pick the second workbook, and these two workbooks are almost similar, right? So we're not gonna see many differences. So of course they have a different name, but they are actually in the same path, same author, they were created at the same time. They're almost the same size. There are a few, you see that one is a bit bigger because there's some more data. These particular two workbooks are almost the same. But if you have two very different workbooks, you will get interesting results here. So let me actually show you. So let's close this one. And let's pick some other workbooks. Let me go back here. And I'm just gonna get this workbook first, and this other workbook second. And now you see we have well, they are still in the same path, yes, and they are still same author because it was me, but they are from different dates, different size, yeah, and also not protected, different number of worksheets. So we should probably change this to worksheets, right? So that's how we compare two workbooks. And as I explained earlier, we could go on and compare more and keep adding the data here, right? That's something you can also do with compare XLS. So if we get the workbook summary for this particular workbook, that's what we get here. And if we want to compare the two workbooks that we've just compared here, we would just pick each here. Or we can see the details for each of the workbooks. Actually, this one has 8 formulas and 29 cells with data, 1 comment. So there's even more information here than what we've seen, right? This one has 88 cells with data and 34 formulas. And then we can compare the two. We'll see one next to the other. So that's how the compare workbooks, that's how compare XLS works for workbooks. Then we can go ahead and see how to compare two worksheets. But we're gonna look into that in the next video, actually, right? So we've seen here how to compare two workbooks, how to get the different properties for each of the workbooks and see the comparison here in the worksheet. In the next video, we'll see how to compare worksheets. That's a bit more complicated, so it's probably gonna be a bit longer, but at the same time, it will be very interesting. So stay tuned and thanks for watching.